Hello, everybody. Welcome to the DePINed Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. I am thrilled to have Thomas, a co-founder of Silencio here. Welcome, Thomas.
Pleasure being here today, Tom. Thanks for the invite.
So listen, let's get straight into it. Tell us what Silencio does.
So before we, let's say, go towards what Silencio does, maybe we can talk about the problem that we are trying to solve, which is one that we can all relate to. So maybe, Tom, let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a situation where you were you travel a lot, right? That you went to an hotel and you ended up having a sleepless night because of the loudness, outside of your hotel room? Or did you ever go to a restaurant where you couldn't basically hear the person in front of you because it was so loud? Or did you ever, let's say, move to a new place or looked for a new office space and just found out later that the soundscape was much louder than anticipated?
All of the above has happened to me, but the most egregious is on airplanes when some of the PSA announcements are literally dangerously loud. And I've even downloaded an app to get the decibels and have complained via Twitter about the decibel level of the airline announcements. So, yes.
Well, that's basically a problem that we can all relate to, and it is noise pollution, essentially. And Silencio is really looking to create awareness for noise pollution and to be able to provide the necessary tools to tackle it on a global scale. So we went ahead and created a mobile-based and gamified Deepin that you can freely access via any one of the available stores. And through this, you get the chance to get rewarded for delivering your surrounding noise level readings. And it is super easy. Just in a matter of about 30 seconds, you can become part of the network and start uploading different data sets. And this could be walking around your city or neighborhoods, discovering those hexes, as we want to like to say, delivering hyperlocal data on how, let's say, a neighborhood might compare to another one, and without being able to, let's say, influence how we price real estate in the future, and at the same time be able to do restaurant or hotel check-ins, to be able to provide hyperlocal, check-in information on an objective level of the soundscape at that time and that place, and without providing, the foundation for us to be able to use these tools in the future in platforms for hotel and restaurant booking platforms and influence positively the lives of millions of people.
And so, obviously, that's interesting. That's on and sound, I think, is how do I phrase it the right way? It is a attribute that is obviously very important, but I don't think we're accustomed to monitoring, measuring, and kind of being aware of in a systematic way, right? So this is because you could then almost, I think what you're talking about is even down the road having sound be one of the criteria on which places and experiences are measured, like you may have like an amenity, right? As you would late check-in or whatever else it might be. You would think sound is noise level is a component, is an additional component that needs to be categorized, tracked, monitored, and rated. Is that fair?
Definitely. We see not only sound, but generally geo-data becoming more important in our everyday lives. So, everything from choosing where to eat to where to live, we think that decisions in terms of how the air quality is or how loud an environment is are going to start shaping how we make those decisions. So as we have this increasing trend towards longevity, and at the same time, we're seeing cities, according also to expectations on the WHO, expecting to have, let's say, over 60% of the world population living in cities by 2050. We are definitely seeing that there's going to be an increased need for these solutions. So we're really trying to position Silencio early on as the hub for any type of, smartphone generated data, but focus primarily on noise level data. And for that, we see a huge opportunity for us, but at the same time to go about this in a deepened approach, because it has been so far the best strategy that we could have imagined to apply this to, achieve what we have achieved so far, which thanks to an amazing community, we already got to create the biggest noise level data sets for all of these different use cases that I'm mentioning.
Well, awesome. So let's go into a little bit about how it works. You mentioned, it's device based, right? So I've downloaded it. You basically download an app on your phone. You give it access to your microphone, and then it tracks noise where you go, and you're rewarded for that. Is that how it works?
Well, today we have, let's say, a more of a proactive approach. So you download the app and you can start a measurement wherever you are. So you could check in into any type of venue, or you could just walk around your city. You can even create noise complaints now, which is a new tool that we brought out with our latest app update, which we're very happy with, because noise complaints is even a tool that we're not rewarding within the app because we didn't want to create, a bias. But it was amazing to see that already thousands of complaints are being created every single week across the world. And this is also providing the necessary tools for governments to be able to take smarter decisions going into the future. There's not even a centralized place to look at noise complaints at most of the cities worldwide. So we're seeing that each one of these data sets that we're creating is tapping into different markets and different data buyers. But for us, it was super important that it is very easy to use. It is really, like we like to say, a mix between Helium and Pokemon Go. That was like our idea from the start of what we wanted to create. But at the same time, we're looking into major ways to make this as frictionless as possible going into the future, because we're firm believers that, of course, a reward is always amazing to incentivize the initial growth of a network. But the only way for us to sustain in the long run is to create real utility for you as a user, so that you're going to be coming back to use this. As you might be leaving a Google review in a restaurant, you're going to be consuming reviews as well, right? So we are not only looking to create that real utility, but to create a complete frictionless way for you to deliver data. So this means passive ways for you to be able to deliver value to the network, because you might have some users that are, let's say, more incentivized to be super active, and others that say, hey, I love the idea, but it's enough to have the app running in the background and I'm happy with that, right? As long as everything is anonymous and data privacy compliant.
So let's talk about, you mentioned value to customers, and I think of that in two ways. There's value to the person who's holding the phone, who's downloaded the app, who is, sharing data and receiving some sort of other value for that, whether that's tokens or whether that's actually information. That's one sort of element. The other value proposition, I suppose, is the aggregation of this data and the potential monetization of it. And so help me understand that second piece. Is there a market? Who buys this data? Who is that valuable to? And how does that part of it work?
Yeah. So I would separate this in like two different sections. On one side, we're seeing that all the different data sets that we're tapping into, each one of them has a different maturity stage and a different market that they might be addressing, because at the same time as we're creating these data sets, we're also creating positive data externalities that might be tapping into more established data markets. So as we progress this bigger vision of becoming the hub for any type of noise level related data, it's amazing to see that we are already fostering and sustaining that Deepin flywheel. So this is also very important for us to be able to succeed in the long run. Today, our data products are being consumed primarily by data aggregators. So these are big companies that most of us might know. We will be releasing a couple of these names in the near future, as we are waiting now to release the white paper and to go live with the token as well. But it was essential for us to find that product market fit before launching a token, not only on the supply of the value, but also on the consumption of the same. So when we talk about each data set, we might be targeting different data buyers. And the way we're going to be commercializing the majority of these data sets are going to be via APIs. And here we're really not trying to reinvent the wheel when it comes to how we want to price this. I mean, we're already looking at successful pricing models that are targeting similar data sets within different niches. For example, we know that Google is doing a major bet on enhancing its Google Maps capabilities, as you can already access, for example, if you're in the US, information on pollen or wildfires or air quality all throughout the US. So they're already experimenting on how they can enhance those map features. So this means that there's also a very standardized pricing for that established, that we aim on making sure that we align ourselves to that. And position Silencio in the best possible way going into the future. The data then, depending on which data set, if we're talking on street level data, let's say the low hanging fruit there is real estate platforms. We want to be able to provide the USP for these platforms for users to go on them, being able to differentiate a different apartment, one to the other one based on what neighborhood they're in. How do they differentiate at different times of the day? What are the main sources of sound during different days of the week? This is all information that doesn't exist today and has really the value to be able to influence the pricing of real estate worldwide. Last but not least, as I mentioned before, hotel and restaurant booking platforms are going to be essential for our check-in data. And we also plan on creating a governmental, more, let's say, subscription-based model for a platform for the governments to be able to consume our data on a deeper level when it mostly comes to noise complaints, as this is live data that they can then consume and use in order to create more livable places, but to understand what might be happening in their city at that moment.
Interesting on all those fronts to grasp it. But two sort of related questions. Is this a new market? I.e., you're not replacing a existing provider that's providing this sound level data. It sounds like this is uniquely new that you're providing, which is interesting because it's kind of adding another dimension to whether it's real estate listings or government information, whatever it is. Great. And then how do you think about the size, economic size, the value? Like in terms of, you mentioned earlier that there are certain metrics or certain productization of data sets that's driven by Google. So how do you think about the scale of noise data in terms of revenue?
It's a great question. And I mean, as I'm saying, we're tapping into different markets simultaneously. And this is the beauty of it as well, because the phone is a supercomputer that can deliver all tons of interesting data sets. So the environmental data market today is valued at over 38 billion. And we see that growing also double digit in the next years. We do not know precisely what percentage of that we're going to be able to capture, but we're very confident of the potential. If you just look at, for example, the potential amount of API calls that we could have today, just by talking about the top 1,000 platforms for real estate, for hotel and restaurant booking platforms, we're talking over 40 billion unique searches a month that could potentially have our API included. Right. And this is just amazing. And if you start seeing that we already have the foundations to start working with ML models now early in Q1 to create, fully dense data sets that are able to be commercialized via API anywhere in the world. It's amazing to see that this, Deepin model has already got us to a point where the necessary foundation is there to target the markets into the future. As we progress this vision, of course, I was saying that we were tapping into more established data markets. This could be your places of interest data market or location data market in itself that is valued at over 16 billion, also growing double digit, where there's a huge premium for our data as well. Let's say primarily it's important to clarify that all the data is fully anonymized. Also, when we collect the noise level data, we do not collect any audio samples. It's all strictly DBA in numerical form. But we're also attaching a location to each one of these data sets. So the data aggregators are buying our conjoined data sets. They're exploring the use cases with Fortune 500 companies for the data that we're creating. But at the same time, they're also able to commercialize on location data, which has a huge premium on our side because we're bringing a consent on chain. This means that you can really verify that you have the okay from the user on chain to deliver this value, to collect this value, and you know exactly that it is also real data being collected. And if you look at data privacy laws, mostly in the US or with GDPR in Europe, we're seeing that there's a major crackdown on being able to see how data is being sourced ethically. And this is where we are making a difference. We believe that it's going to become the norm going into the future, but these are all positive externalities of what we're doing that we know just by looking at that and other revenue streams that we already have today, like in-app ads, for example. We're not big fans of in-app ads because we really love our product so much that we're very persistent to to do it. But essentially, we understood that as this value flows back to the community, everybody benefits from this, right? So we need to look for any type of revenue stream that can increase the value of Silencio, the network, going forward. And this also includes an in-app shop. So we know that the network in itself is already going to be fully sustainable, going from 1 million users plus. And this is just like 2.5x from where we are today. To give you maybe an overview of everything, but happy to go more in depth into anything.
Well, I mean, that's a very big overview. But let me pull out two pieces of it. So environmental data is massive, and that's huge, but that does not, sounds like that does not yet include sound. And then location and other data. You mentioned location data is also big. So I think you said 16 or so billion for location related data, which is obviously, sounds like that is a easy addition to the data that you're collecting already. And so the sound market, it sounds like, it's not clear what that particularly is. It's some component, or will be some component of environmental data, but we'll see kind of where that is. But location data, which is, sounds like it will just be another toggle, is my guess, like in terms of what you choose to share on the application. So it sounds like the application starts off with sound, hence the name, but you then add other features or you take advantage of other data collection verticals, if you will, to collect additional data besides sound, which allow you to access other markets. Is that, am I thinking about that the right way?
Yes, I mean, if you look at the traditional sound monitoring market, we're looking conjointly at over 2 billion. So, but we don't want, or we don't like to compare ourselves to that one, because the solutions that we're providing are really a 10x in terms of the value that we can create. So that's why we like to say that we are creating a niche market within that for ourselves, and we like to look more in terms of the potential by looking at the environmental market overall, right? Not limit ourselves to the hardware market, because we decided to take the phone approach, or let's say tapping into idle infrastructure, because there are over 6 billion phones out there. Let's say there were only 1 billion 10 years ago. So it has become increasingly more available to be able to access this data. And people are becoming aware of the fact that they can commercialize the data, that the data has value. I mean, there are studies showcasing, I think this was McKinsey that demonstrated that there's over 300 billion in personal data being sold every single year. And we want to tap into that, because we understand that if we grow our community and we have people that are willingly wanting to deliver value, or, this data to not only create impact-driven data sets, but be able to, create a passive income for themselves, we want to be there. And this is where we are positioning Silencio to become the kind of Amazon for smartphone generated data with Deepin model. And Amazon started with books. We're starting with noise level data, and we want to expand from there.
So then that gets to an interesting point, because there are other applications that are using phone sensors, right? You're using it to start off for sound, but you have ones like Nodal, which are using it for location and for tracking other, for tracking purposes. And so then what I think you're talking about is a potential super app, a DePIN super app on a phone, where you think you can potentially have one app that performs that kind of maximizes the sensing capabilities of a phone to provide that data to whatever vertical is most relevant, versus a Nodal, a Silencio, 5 or 6 or 8 different phone apps that each provide access and data relating to 1 or 2 sensors, right? Because you could have it go, you could see the market go each way, right? The phone's a valuable resource, ton of technology, ton of sensors, lots of things to monetize in it. And so then do you end up with one app that it covers everything, or do you end up with different apps that do it all, or do you end up with an app on top that actually then accesses all the ones below it, right? There's sort of 3 potential models that you could see going forward.
Yeah, it's an excellent observation. We definitely see our vertical as being our primary reason for being there, because we understand that this is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity where we clearly have a very good position, well, first mover advantage. But as we grow this vision, we also know that, as Deepin is becoming, let's say, more of a trend, we've been, working with DePINs for the last 4 to 5 years, long term, before it was even coiled, the name. So we always understood that if we want to survive in the long term, we not only need to provide, value in terms of how we collect this value, but also for the people that help us collect it. So this is when it comes down to utility. We think there's going to be tons of new Deepin apps coming, all over the place, probably a lot of them replicating each other. But if you try to become the super app from day one, most likely that's not going to work out for you. And we said for us, hey, no matter what, we want to win this niche for us, because we know that this is a huge successful opportunity in itself, and where we know we can make a positive impact in the world. And once the community is there, let's say once you have the attention of your user base, it's very easy to start looking left and right in terms of how you could further expand those data collection capabilities, and ideally make them as frictionless as possible, so that for people it's just a click and forget about it, right? And we're not competing, say, one-to-one with other apps, because the market is so big in itself that at the end of the day, I see our first challenge in working collectively to start providing better solutions than Web2 counterparts.
Fair enough. I mean, and that you referenced earlier, providing significantly more value than centralized data collection, competitors, which I any metrics on that I would love to hear, but that is certainly something that I find interesting. I'm guessing you'll tell me if I'm wrong here, but that you have more sensors and data is collected more frequently. So you have more data, more precise data collected more frequently. Is that fair?
I mean, if you look at, let's say, Web2 counterparts or more classical competitors, I mean, the Deepin model in itself is amazing because we've seen it over and over again. In our case, it provided us an X50 in growth compared to traditional models. There's a counterpart that took more or less 15 years to get to a third of the user base that we managed to get to in about a year and a half. And we see this as just the beginning, because the Deepin model works amazingly at providing that initial, let's say, boost that you need to act as a kind of like catalyst to get to the masses. But then the challenge emerges, and this is for every Deepin founder out there. How do you make sure that you're creating something sustainable, that no matter, let's say, how the monetary incentives may look like 5 years down the line, that the value that you have created has value, or that you can or be on delivering that value into the future. And this is where we're also seeing that not only are we managing to grow faster, but being able to do this on a blockchain approach is providing specifically that user consent on data to be able to deliver this data on a more ethical way, but at the same time be able to democratize how we collect and how we sell this data, which is changing, I think, the perception of how people are starting to look at the value that they're creating.
Question. So how you mentioned you scaled in a year and a half faster than a 9-year-old competitor. So how many downloads or how many active users do you have?
So we have right now, I think we're reaching probably the 400,000 users early next month, which is a major milestone for us. We're super happy with that. It's more than, I'd say it's going to be about an X10 from where we stood last year. And the amazing thing is that our app right now has probably a retention rate which is similar to major apps like Instagram or X, which we would have never thought of being possible, being as small as we are. But at the same time, we're seeing that this engaged community, I mean, is opening the app more than 1 million times a year. It's creating billions of data points every single week. And it's just impressive to see that this foundation that we're building is going to be essential going forward as we plan on, onboarding more and more data sets that you're going to be able to add value to. Just to give you an example, in Q1, we're going to be including hearing tests within the app. So you're going to be able to understand your hearing health. not only is this a huge important data set for hearing aid manufacturers, we're actually most likely going to be creating this together with the biggest one worldwide, because it provides insights for them on how to market their products and where to focus. But an instant call to action to connect you to any local doctor. And for you, going back to the utility part, you get an understanding of your current hearing health. And if you consider that a third of the world population is going to suffer from some degree of hearing loss by 2050, it's a huge tool to be able to tap into that, to target those problems before they arise.
Well, that's not where I expected you to go, because now that's a health component, right? Which is fascinating. Yeah. But now you start to look at being viewed as somewhere in a health related app, which is very different from how I would have thought about just data collection about environments. But terrific. That's a whole nother angle to get into. You mentioned earlier in the previous answer the need to create a sustainable network and sustainable value over the long term. So you also discussed about looking at your token economics and launching those soon. Can you give some outline as to how you think about designing, building token economics, both from the reward side and then from kind of the revenue side of that you will generate, whether it's the hearing side to doctors or APIs that for restaurants or booking apps or whatever it might be?
Sure. So we will actually be releasing our white paper within the next couple of days. So this is definitely going to include all the necessary information. Talking a bit more on the macro of how we're planning this. Of course, we're not differentiating ourselves from other DePINs when it comes to how we want to create the sustainable flywheel. But we will be having a 50% of any type of value that is generated by the network flowing directly back to the community. So our data essentially at the beginning is only going to be able to be purchased via our native token, SOC token. There's going to be a supply of 100 billion tokens. And we have this airdrop going on right now that is going to give 7.5% of the total market, of the total token supply to our beta users. And this is going to happen then at our TGE, which we're also aiming to do within the next 2 months. As we then look into the future, we decided to go on a more classic approach, but let's say for the Web3 industry, something novel, something different. We understand that 80% of the world population, plays some form of, let's say, lottery in somewhere or the other. But we know that if we're targeting the masses, we might have difficulties going on a too strict Web3 approach, because the product that we created is supposed to address the masses and is supposed to have, blockchain in the background. This is the only way we see this going to 100 million users plus. So we will have a raffle system in place that every single month is going to be like an airdrop, right? At the first of every single month, we were going to look at the value that each single user created. And as we have a double tier system, this means that any type of value that you create within the app rewards you with in-app coins. That then transforms into higher SOC participations at the end of the month. So you could imagine like every single coin that you make, like a raffle ticket, increasing your chances of being participated in these winnings, where we're going to have all different kinds of prizes. They're going to be 100 million monthly prizes to be won. And this can be from life-changing sums of money all the way down to, let's say, frictional approaches, depending on what the value is that you brought and also the luck that you had that month.
So that's interesting on a couple levels. So first, encourage you mentioned the token is required for purchases on the network. Presumably, I would hope you create a fiat front end because you want as many people to buy this as possible. And I think you're gonna have a tough time having governments buying your token to buy that data. Like that's just not going to happen, right? So presumably they'll be able to pay fiat, and behind the scenes the token will be purchased, because I don't think if you want to sell data to the city of Munich, they're not buying tokens, right?
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. I mean, there's definitely going to be ways for them to be able to pay in fiat, but that gets translated directly into tokens.
Great. And then relating to returning 50% to the network, I thought you were going to say buy and burn. And I question also why it's 50. There's a whole range. I've seen some projects go as high as, I think Render is 90% or 95%. You see GeoNet at 80%. You have some go down to, I think, third. I think it's a Hive Mapper is like 35%, if I remember correctly. So, I think the best model is the highest by far. But it sounds like that's not buy and burn. That's returned via this prize pool concept, which is also something I haven't heard before. I find pretty interesting. Rather than just taking the revenue, buying, burning the token, you're going to be putting that revenue into prizes, which are distributed via lottery. Is that right?
So there's two aspects to that. One of them is that we're going to have, this is going to be disclosed next week, so I won't specify the exact numbers, but high digits going back to the community over the next 5 years. And this is already within the tokenomics in itself, right? So this is going to be the community rewards pool, and anything that comes from revenues is going to go for a future community rewards pool that then gets activated as soon as that initial pool is consumed, right? So we have, with that, create more of a sustainable approach into the future, that as long as our data is being sold, there's going to be rewards to be able to be grabbed by the community going into the future.
But when you say rewards, that's where I guess I'm confused. That means if the network generates $1, is that reward pool then whatever it is, 50 cents or whatever that number is, that goes to the community not via buy and burn, but via some other cash or
let's say it would be kind of a buy and lock. We would buy it from the community and then we would lock it for future community rewards. So it is kind of like an indirect burning, only that we said that we didn't want to go that way because we wanted to maintain the same constant token supply and use that as token, future incentivization tools, because we're really aiming long-term here. And at the same time, depending, of course, on which model you're looking at or which Deepin, they might have their own reasons to put, what percentage in terms of the value flowing back to the community. As you might know, this whole networks in itself doesn't sustain itself, right? There's a whole operation behind of this. There's a application, salary, service, etc. that needs to be covered, and this is primarily then used through this 50% flowing back to the project itself.
I totally I grasp that, but presumably the company or the enterprise has a token pool. And if you were to burn 100% of revenue, then you are 100% aligned with the community, because your only source of funding would be the treasury, and you would be 100% aligned with making that treasury as valuable as possible, because it's that treasury that would provide basically the budget to run the network. And so any divergence from the 100% runs a risk, right, of incentives diverging between the actual business and the token holders. It doesn't mean it's not aligned, right? But if it's 100%, then it is 100%, right? And so this is sort of the token maxi kind of concept here, because the business maxi would be like, oh, we're gonna zero goes to the community, it's all gonna go to fund the business, and that's clearly not in the interest of a decentralized or of a DePIN protocol. So, because it's a little interesting to argue that you both will have a treasury which has value, which goes to support the network, and you also think that you also need to have a bunch of revenue to support the business as well, because presumably you should need one of those, but not both, right?
No, I fully understand where you're coming from, but what we're saying is that we don't want to be fully dependent on the treasury to be able to sustain this business going forward, because no matter what, we want to be able to keeping providing this value to the world. And this is why this 50% is not set in stone, is our, so to say, start into the market. And as we progress this into the future, this might be going up for sure. But we definitely need to create a sustainable model first. And this is an absolute priority for us, because otherwise we will be just selling you on a promise and not delivering, right? And this is what we were always trying to do, things different in this market, at least for us. Since we entered, we said, hey, we actually, let's say that the first year and a half operations we financed with directly with our own money. So we didn't have investors back then. We created the first product market fit directly with our own commitments. And this was, again, important for us, not only to showcase to the community, but to the investors as well. Hey, we're fully committed here. And what we want to do here is demonstrate that all of this works before even launching a token. And this is already in contrast to maybe 95% of what we see out there.
So that is, well, that's definitely true. And then in terms, just to cover the other piece of it, in terms of rewards, are rewards paid to everyone who has an app that provides data? Is it going to be the more enabling you do this, you get more rewards, or how do rewards differ by geography based on where you need more data or it's more valuable? How does the reward system work for in the model for the community to incent the close to 500,000 users you already have?
So having this double tier system in the app enables us to be able to be much more flexible in terms of how we reward what action and where within the app itself. And this is amazing because it helps us to centralize the value creation where it's needed most. So if we look at hardware-based DePINs or that have specific hardware, the problem that they might encounter is that if they don't have the right density in a place, they're not able to deliver that value in that place. But let's say if we know that we have 10,000 users in Manhattan, right? And we know that there's a certain area of Manhattan that needs to be mapped where we know there's a direct data buyer on the other side. They might create a bounty in order to centralize that value creation at that place for the time where it's needed and create a higher reward pool for that value that needs to be gathered, right? So it's a bit like we've seen with other projects, wanting to create hotspot locations of where the value needs to be created. Some, hardware-based approaches are finding other creative ways, but this really enables us to reward even different data sets differently by geofencing whatever area is most interesting for us.
So is there a baseline of reward that anyone who downloads the app receives, and then that is a additional reward based on prioritized geographies or prioritized data sets?
Not yet. So today it's standardized. You're going to see that you will earn the same no matter where you are in the world.
Fine.
As we progress into the future, it's a tool that we will definitely be making use of. And at the end of the day, it's about also being able to reward whatever is bringing the biggest value to the network at that moment, right? But today, for the amount of time that you're measuring, you get a fixed noise coin rewards. For every single check-in that you do, you get a fixed price. If you're, let's say, the first one checking into a location, you might get a bonus. So there are different, kind of like smaller reward differentiations, but it's the same for everyone.
Okay, super interesting. Gotcha. Well, that is, and then I guess the concept with a global network is the same reward concept. Is that token could be, assuming there's a fiat value to it, worth way more in low income countries? And so would you then are you focused on kind of high GDP areas, or because you have a potential, right, for certain, you've seen this happen, I think, with helium in China, for example, or with Filecoin in China, where there was a huge amount of focus on earning rewards there because they could just scale it incredibly quickly. And there was obviously fraud associated with that as well. And so, right, so it becomes, and that's partly because the token value was much higher there from a, GDP basis versus the value it was generating, I suppose. So I suppose that is, I guess you have to figure out a way to prevent all of a sudden your user base being, a ton of farms in, phone farms in China or somewhere, right?
No, for sure. I mean, we have very strict mechanisms in place in order to detect any type of malicious behavior. Of course, it's always a cat and mouse game. You always get better and better at it. And I guess it was amazing for us to have already 2 years of trial and error to understand, how people are trying to trick the system. It's inevitable. But we're very confident that we are reducing it to the absolute minimum. And within that, we are creating the right incentives for people to go out there and measure what needs to be measured and not create phone farms, for example, right? So you're going to earn a fraction of what you could if you go out around your city and really measure across your streets or even check into a restaurant. There's fun anecdote there that I came across with about incentives, that you always need to make sure that you align your incentives exactly with what you want to create, because people are definitely going to use, the easiest route or the most straightforward way to
To
doing
get
things.
to it, yeah.
And there was a story back in colonial India. There was a British officer that wanted to get rid of snakes, of pitons, and he said that he was going to pay for each snake head that was brought to him. And the Indians were super smart, and they started breeding them in their basements. So you can see that he basically had to abolish that, and their end result was that there were more snakes around than before.
Because then they had all these snakes and no one's paying for the heads, so they let them out. I totally get that.
Yeah.
That frankly is an issue with Deepin in general, which I think you've certainly highlighted, right? Like, I mean, literally it happened with a storage protocol where they got paid based amount of storage. Like, okay, you want storage? Here you go. And there was just useless garbage data that was stored just because that's where people were being paid for. So they just sort of created, fictitious data in order to be paid for it. So that is, I think Deepin is a right in the center of sort of the incentive kind of creation and the advantage that can be taken of it. Let's back up for a second. We're way delayed in asking about the founding of it. So tell us about yourself, Thomas, about how you arrived here and what your background and history was, and how you got to co-founding Silencio.
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So I'm originally from Argentina, but I spent probably most of my life in Europe, mostly in Germany. I'm an economist, and I worked in the legal space for about 8 years. I was back then focusing on centralizing intellectual property portfolios and emerging market economies. And I always back then understood that there was a huge problem with, abroad payments. There were all of these thousands of, law firms all across the globe sending payment transactions to each other, paying, I think, about 5 to 10 billion in fees yearly only in my sector within the legal space. And once I tried to see if people, would be interested in using blockchain options, this was 2014, 15. Of course, I met with a huge wall of technological laggards that were not interested at all. So that got me intrigued into looking deeper into the space, because I understood the potential that lay behind it. And I guess at 2018, 19, this was the first time we came across first DePINs like Helium. Back then with my brothers, we actually started this company, Silencio, also with 3 of my brothers. We're 4 brothers, and another co-founder as well. And we understood very quickly the power of using an incentive model in order to create value or solve real tangible problems in the economy. And we thought it was just the beginning of something that would arise, which luckily then became what we're seeing today as Deepin. But we took the choice back then to enter the space full time and see how we could start deploying all of these networks. So we created a company, let's say deployment as a service company in Europe, that then started deploying all of these first generation DePINs across 5 European cities. So I remember those first days, we were climbing on each roof in every single city, and completely fascinated by this idea of really creating a better, more decentralized world. And we quickly understood the limitations also back then, as soon as the bear market hit, of those first generation DePINs. So we thought to ourselves, hey, maybe it's time that we create something of our own. We really fell in love with the idea of crowdsourcing geo-data. And we understood quickly that if we go this approach more on, by tapping into idle infrastructure, we would avoid some of the pitfalls that we saw at the beginning, which on one side were, the lack of hyper scalability, because when there is an ROI expectation, people are only going to scale the projects as long as it's interesting to do so. And at the same time, we understood that if we take the software-based approach, we're going to be much lean in terms of OpEx and CapEx, and be able to provide, the value where it's needed most, as I was saying before. Furthermore, you have no logistical nightmares. And we decided to go with this on a completely, free to join basis, and kind of like wanting to become the free entry door to Deepin. And this is where the idea of Silencio arose, because we saw that, phones were amazing at collecting DBA in general, and that nobody was addressing this with a Deepin model. And this is then how Silencio was born back in the days.
Really, really interesting. Out of curiosity, you got your family's from Argentina. You're in Munich. What you mentioned, 400,000 or so users. Users, are they European? Are they South American? Are they North American? How is your user base related to your to where you're from? Because you think about, I think Deepin is heavily, obviously European, North American, and obviously, China is a big kind of, at least in the cloud infrastructure space, quite significant. But do you guys have a material user base in Argentina and South America as well, given your backgrounds?
So funny enough, Latin America kind of like came after in terms of user adoption, because at the beginning, we were dealing with all of these different DePINs, so we already had access to their communities, and we said, hey, let's start commercializing Silencio in those platforms, and by tapping into those more, let's say, organic approaches. So funny enough, we were able to scale Silencio to where it is today without having spent a single dollar in marketing. Of course, things are gonna start changing now, but this was only thanks to the established Deepin communities that are already worldwide, very engaged. And when it comes to our user division, we are seeing about 50% of our user base split between the US and Europe, and the other 50%, I'd say around 30% Asia, and the other 20 between Africa and Latin America.
Interesting. Cool. Well, listen, as you built this over time, and it looks like you've been working on this for quite a while. I've looked at other DePIN protocols and been involved. What has been a learning? Like, what has been hard? What has been different than you expected? Any kind of lessons that you've learned that you would take away from this, or you would call out to people that are in the space or thinking about joining it?
I mean, I guess you learn new lessons every single day, right? So we always see that we're a bit smarter every single day than we were yesterday. There were definitely some pivotal lessons for us. I mean, we would definitely do a lot of things different if we would go back in time, but I guess it's all about, the learning curve in itself. I guess I never learned so much like in the last 2 to 3 years and in my let's say adult life. And this is for us, if we look back at our biggest challenges, I remember the first year just even trying to fundraise during a bear market where nobody wanted to invest into anything. Deepin wasn't even coiled then, and we were trying to provide or bring this vision to life, which for us was like super clear. This is completely doable, and we're definitely going to get where we wanted to get. But we understood that if we don't go out there and create a proof of concept by investing not only our own time but also our own money, that investors were never going to understand where this vision is supposed to be headed. And so let's say that proving that product market fit was one of our biggest learnings, that the sooner you can do it as a founder, the better. But on, let's say, more general advice for founders, we found that mostly in this space, you need to make sure that you hyper focus on something, because there's always like a million different opportunities around you. Everybody's going to tell you on different ways you could address your problem, but you really need to try to stick like to your core values and really aim to where you believe the biggest value also lies in the long run, and really making sure that you're super persistent. And yeah, at the end of the day, I would say let's say be willing to take on that workload, because it's always going to be more than you expect from the start.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop. It keeps going. Everyone thinks I'll get my first fundraise done and then I'm good. Or no, then the work starts. I'm gonna get this first, deploy the network. Okay, great. No, then more work comes, and then I'm gonna deploy, these 5 features, and then we'll be good. Well, no, then you right, like, so each milestone that you set is sort of like what do you call a false summit. When you're running or biking, you see the top of the hill and you think you're there, and then you get to the top and you're like, oh, that's not the top. The top's over there, and you get to that top's not there. Top's higher up, right? Like, it's sort of that's the analogy I think of with regard to founding and building.
For sure, I think that's a good analogy. And when it comes to building, at least I can talk on the software side. Everything takes longer than expected, right? It's probably like building anything, but I'm the one that likes to bring in the vision to the team and to move, push things forward. but I do realize that all the ideas I have, we probably only do 5 to 10% of those, just because of the time restrictions that we have, and so we need to really focus on what has the highest impact at the end of the day. And you're always tempted to try to do the best thing out there, but you need to limit your time and focus your resources at what matters most.
I totally get that. Well, let's question for you. You've obviously been in the space for a while. So, are there other projects that you pay attention to? You've learned from that you think other people you want to kind of call attention to, or that you track?
Definitely. I mean, there are tons of projects that we look closer into, that we've even worked together with. We've been also onboarding a couple of more hardware-based DePINs into our in-app shop, because we felt it's a great way to have our community get access to these projects on a more beneficial approach. But for example, one that I like because I'm a passionate drone flyer myself is Spexy. So I definitely like their approach. Makes complete sense to me. And I'm a big fan of DePINs that tap also into existing infrastructure. Just because for us, that was always kind of like the way to go, because it didn't make sense to have, infrastructure standing around that could essentially be creating, a passive income for you, or even, value for society going into the future. So maybe this goes also directly into another project I love that is very upcoming. I don't know many people know about it. But we know these guys very well. We've been working with them in the past as well. So we know that their dedication to making this happen is amazing, which is called Charge XYZ. So they are tapping into, this 90% untapped charging infrastructure for electric vehicles on a personal level that we know could be these charging stations providing value in order to solve anxiety, range issues for electric vehicle owners, and creating a passive way for them to earn simultaneously. And that market in itself is completely untapped right now when it comes to the Deepin approach. And I see a huge potential down the line for them.
Yeah, listen, it is interesting, because it's a perfect example of infrastructure that you have that is sort of latent value that is very suitable for monetization. And so that is, to me, what, kind of a core component of Deepin, where you have this hardware or this infrastructure that has value and is completely stranded unless you're able to figure out a way to use it through one of these networks. And there's some little issues there with people pulling up to your home and plugging in. And so there's some, you got to have a little bit of security and some protections around that. I think there's little hurdles, but it seems like that's also something, having a decentralized charging network and monetizing and maximizing this existing infrastructure is, of course, a no-brainer. But some of those details are a little tough, but super interesting. And obviously big fan of Spexy, for sure. They were one of my, they were on this podcast, months ago, and think they're terrific. Well, terrific. Well, listen, how do people download the app? How do they get involved? How do they start earning? Tell people how to follow you, track your progress, give us all the details on how everyone can get involved. Because there's no one listening to this that can't download the app in 1 minute right now. So how do they do that?
Exactly. So basically, they go on their Google Play Store or iOS Store, search for Silencio Network. You're going to find it right away. Once you download it, it's basically going to ask you to create a username. We're not going to ask for more than that, and your email. And with that, you're ready to go. You're going to have a chance to include a code if you want. This is going to give you a welcome bonus. And this code you can obtain from the community or from Tom directly. And this is going to put you off in a good start. And then you are ready to explore our app in itself. It's a very engaging community. So we super invite you to go on our Discord, on our X or Telegram. We also just created a Telegram bot, which you can use to create further challenges or to accomplish further challenges. Yeah, reach out to us in any one of those channels.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thanks for being on. It's super interesting, and look forward to seeing all the different other additional data collection points that you guys add, and also look forward to the token white paper and the launch, and look forward, and we should have you back on when things are, the tokens live and everything is humming for sure, when you reach that fall summit.
Yeah, the next fall summit. But I mean, at the end of the day, each one of those summits then starts getting bigger and bigger. But this is, again, only possible thanks to an amazing community. So also a big thanks from our side for anybody listening here that already has our app or is willing to join. And thank you, Tom, for the amazing questions. Look forward to staying in touch and coming back in the future.
Great. Thanks so much, Thomas.